Welcome to this week's lesson. My name is Professor Trevor Miller from Valencia College, and I'm here to guide you through the Truman administration's Fair Deal. While previous lessons have been focused on Truman's foreign policy, this lesson is going to be focused on Truman's policies at home, including the Fair Deal and his re-election. As we consider President Harry S. Truman, one of the things we have to think about is that prior to his selection as vice president, many discounted his career as over as a politician. Furthermore, he wasn't well received. He wasn't well liked. It was a hard act to follow after FDR. And Truman didn't have the charisma, the personality, the background of someone like FDR, the popularity of FDR. So he had big shoes to follow. Now, as Truman goes to win his first election as president, many in his own party discount Truman's ability to win. Now, Truman takes a different approach than any politician before him. Truman does a whistle-stop tour of the country, going from town to town, and many other presidents and presidential contenders have done this. However, the pace and the veracity that Truman put forth surprised many people, as well as the tone of Truman's his campaign. While he was on campaign, Truman sought out to scare the American public into voting Democratic. Rather than putting forth initiatives and ideas, his whole platform was basically focused on scaring the American public into voting Democratic versus voting Republican. Now, as Truman approaches the presidential convention, Truman comes forward and challenges the Republican Party. He basically says, "You've had years to get this done. You have been in power in Congress and have failed to get these initiatives moved forward." And he called for a special session of Congress to come together to address his platform. Now, Congress didn't know what to make of this. They had never received a challenge of this nature with such negative tone and being forced into this position. So Congress failed to act on many of these initiatives. Truman ends up winning re-election, coming across as sound, as solid, this robust leader that the American population needed. However, while all of those things occurred, the tone of American politics was forever aimed at the negative on the large scale after Truman. So please keep that in mind as this lesson continues. So these are the overall goals and objectives that Truman hoped to encompass in what he called a fair deal. Now, one of these that are on here is we're going to focus quite heavily on is the Servicemen's Readjustment Act, or what we commonly know today as the GI Bill. And much of today's lesson is going to be focused on the GI Bill. However, Truman sought to encompass many liberal plans as he progressed as president. One of those was he wanted a civil rights law to be put in place to protect the rights of minorities. He wanted to modernize Social Security and expand Social Security. So if you remember when FDR enacted Social Security, many of the day laborers, people who were migrant workers or people who were domestic aides in houses, were not eligible for Social Security. The Truman administration wanted to bring those people into Social Security. That way they could have a social safety net as they aged. He wanted to increase the minimum wage. He wanted to create a national health insurance program, something along the lines of Medicare and Medicaid for all Americans, and to do away with the country's obsession with health insurance. He wanted to create a method where housing could be achieved, not only for veterans, but other people around the country of low socioeconomic status. He wanted to increase public housing. He wanted to instill workers' compensation for people who were injured on the job. He wanted to modernize unemployment to make sure that people were protected. And he wanted to create a method of universal health care to cover all Americans in some minimum way, shape, or form. This was a bold platform for the 1950s and early 1960s. First on the agenda that we're going to be covering is the Service Members Readjustment Act, or GI Bill. Now, in today's system, the GI Bill is split into several different parts, and some of those parts, right, are education-based and mortgage-based protections for veterans. Now, under the Servicemen's Readjustment Act, this basically provided college opportunity for GIs coming back from World War II, and it offered them the ability to purchase a home which was out of reach for many Americans before the war. And as we think about higher education, we have to think about higher education before the war. Now, for before the war, remember that there was the economic decline, right, of the Great Depression, and college education was out of reach for most Americans. Those that went to college were usually the people that already had money. The people that didn't go to college, right, were the people that didn't have money, and they went into some type of trade or industry. And the Service Members Readjustment Act, or GI Bill, changed that for Americans. Here was a time where more Americans started going to college than any other time in U.S. history up until our modern era. But this changed the scope of education around the country and opened up educational opportunities to millions of people that didn't have it before. And this was a basic right associated with their military service. Now, the act provided things like tuition. It gave them money for subsistence, a stipend. It gave them money for books and supplies, equipment, and it provided educational counseling to help them on their path to success. Now, as we consider the GI Bill, one of the major achievements coming out of World War II and Truman's administration was that the number of degrees awarded in the United States more than doubled because of the Service Members Readjustment Act. This expanded educational opportunities far and away more than anything else had ever done. This was also good for colleges and universities. They now had a steady stream of income that had previously not been there. This was good because they could expand, right? They could hire new teachers. Not only think about the educational system that benefited and the service members that educated, but all of those organizations that go into making a college or university work, things like maintenance and groundskeeping and all of the administration that helps keep those things running. This helped balloon the number of workers in colleges and universities around the country. So all in all, this was a great deal, not only for servicemen, for schools, but for the economy at large. The language of the GI Bill was quite clear that the GI Bill applied to all returning servicemen who had served their country in an honorable method. Now, when these GIs returned home, unfortunately, the local businesses, the local banks and other organizations, local colleges, oftentimes did not adhere to the letter of the law and frequently discriminated against minority veterans and their families as they returned home from war, often denying them the ability to get loans for houses, to apply to schools, and to use the rights and privileges that they've earned as service members, people who put their lives on the line for the United States and its freedom. I can let you read through the statistics here, and the main thing I want to impart is that while this program was not implemented fairly across the country for all races in the United States, it did balloon the economy. It opened up college to people that it was never an option before. It offered home ownership, something that many, many people had never had the opportunity before, and the economy grew in a way that this country had never seen before. The GI Bill, the Servicemen's Readjustment Act, was a crowning success of both the end of FDR's term and Truman's administration. Truman's election, he brought forth an 8-point plan to Congress, basically identifying how he wanted to take FDR's platform of a New Deal and make it more equitable and egalitarian for all members of the United States. He wanted to focus, as stated before, on labor, civil rights, healthcare, and housing. 1950s America, the Fair Deal was an incredibly liberal plan. Now, while Truman wanted to get these initiatives pushed through and become law, he had to rely on both parts of Congress to help make this happen. Both Democrats and Republicans were in opposition to most of Truman's domestic policy. Great success overseas dealing with the rebuilding of Europe, the Marshall Plan, dealing with communism, rebuilding Japan and governing Japan, reestablishing relations around the world. Truman's policies at home floundered. One of his only crowning achievements was the Fair Housing Act of 1949, and this basically created nearly 1 million houses aimed at low and socioeconomically challenged individuals around the country. The idea was to help put a roof over the heads of many Americans around the country. Opposition to Truman's Fair Deal and the social revolution he was trying to put forward was from within his own party. Many Southern Democrats attacked his programs as being too liberal, as well as his medical insurance program that he wanted to impose. The medical lobby attacked the program as being socialist, so the program never passed. While he faced all these problems, there were also problems with education and religion incorporated into things like jobs and aid and those types of things. So to help combat discrimination in the workplace dealing with things like religion, Truman helped pass the Fair Employment Practices Act. Basically, this banned any type of racial discrimination in the hiring process and in the workplace. This basically made it so that employers could no longer ask what your religious background was and could not hire or fire you based off of your religious preferences or lack thereof. Wrap up this lesson, I would like to reiterate that this material is meant to supplement your textbook, not replace it, as well as I hope you've enjoyed this lesson as we focused on the end of the FDR's term, the rise of Truman as a powerhouse politician, and him trying to get the Fair Deal passed while he encompassed many, many roadblocks. The program was largely not successful, mainly due to the lack of support from within his own party and lobbyists from the medical industry attacking his platform as well. I hope you have a great week and you're enjoying the course.